Thank you for joining us in this episode number 18 of SRE Practitioner series. I'm your host, Suresh GP, and I'm extremely glad to see you all again in our episode number 18. Today, our guest as a SRE practitioner is Sebastian Vietz. He's the reliability advocate and also runs a podcast as a host called the SRE Path, and joining us all the way from Ontario, Canada. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for joining us, and I hope you're doing well.
I'm okay. Thank you very much. We're fortunate with some late summer warmth here in Ontario. So yeah, I'm looking at the sun, so I'm doing pretty good. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, Sebastian. So when we were looking at some of those episodes, we thought, what can be this episode? And you are a seasoned veteran, so we wanted to have something very unique for this episode for our viewers. So we want to talk a little bit about do's and don'ts of SRE. But before we get into that crux, I want you to introduce yourself to the viewers and what really helped you to be as an SRE. Why are you so passionate about site reliability engineering? So give us some thoughts on your journey that will help people to get a lot more on the context. Again, that's something that we will talk about somewhere as we go, but your experience, please.
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity. I got into SRE by being thrown into the deep end of the pool. Let me put it this way. So somebody said one day to me, I think it was 2014 or 15, hey, Sebastian, you're doing now SRE. I had no idea at the time what that meant. And here are 30 people that you're going to turn into SREs as well. Because I was a software engineering manager at the time already, used to like leading multiple teams. And so I was basically taken out of this one role, put into a new one. And like probably some people can relate to it. Here's the Google SRE book. Go do this, right? Realized fairly quickly that the book is nice. It's a good read. It's definitely a historical read now in the context of SRE, and everybody should read it. I'm not saying don't read it. I'm saying read it, but remember where it's coming from. And yeah, realized very quickly that that's not for us in the organization that I was working at the time. We can't do that, right? It doesn't work like this. We're not Google. Nobody is Google other than Google, right? Obviously had to change pace and pivot, and learned over the years as an SRE practitioner, engineer, and leader in the space that it's very important that you look at your own realm, your own company, your own team structure in order to determine what SRE is for you in your specific context, right? I think at first I was a reluctant SRE practitioner, and eventually, I think 2018, 2019, I had to make up my mind. Either fully commit to it or say, nah, I go back to my roots, software engineering, process engineering, go back there because that's where I was comfortable. I decided not to be comfortable, but to fully commit, and basically have been learning, teaching, preaching, advocating, coaching ever since. Most recently, been super active on LinkedIn. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, I'm basically there all day, every day, write the occasional article. And yeah, very passionate about the podcast that I've been running. Started this year with my co-host Ash Patel, where we're looking at SRE more so from a management and people leadership perspective, rather than going too much into the technical details of if I was an engineer. It's more from the perspective of I'm an SRE leader or a leader in the space, right? How would I approach SRE? And so that's a sort of the umbrella that we have chosen for our podcast. And so now we're here, right?
Awesome. I think I'm glad that I would strongly recommend people to have a look at the SRE Path podcast, because I think today Sebastian, to be fair, as we do a consulting coaching across the world, we need to educate a lot of SRE leaders, right? They need to be aware of the do's and the don'ts, and also be equipped with the right level of information before driving the transformation. Because I always believe little knowledge is dangerous. So trying to be equipping themselves with the do's and don'ts makes it really valuable as part of driving the transformation. So that really fits into our theme of today's episode. We're going to talk about do's and don'ts, because what has happened over the past is, as organizations start adopting towards SRE, there's so much things that they have learned by experience, right? What we call as wisdom of production. So some of the times you need to start asking this question around what are some of the do's and don'ts that they have to be well aware, so that it's like a precursor before they kind of jump into this pool and then decide, what am I supposed to do after I get inside the pool? So from your experience, and it could be newbies, it could be experienced practitioners, let's start with do's, right? So let's start with the positive aspect of what are some of the do's that you would recommend for kind of newbies to even before start or talking about SRE?
Yeah, very good question. Let's start with the newbies. Yeah, somebody that is interested in SRE, somebody that wants to cross over into SRE, somebody that is peripherally related to the discipline and to the practitioners, right? All those folks. I think there is a do that starts with the why. Why do it? Why do you want to do it? Why are you interested in it? Why do you think it's a good idea for your company, for your team to go down that path?
Right.
Think really, really deeply about why you want to do this, right? Because there are lots of opportunities, right? There are definitely also lots of challenges that are coming along with it. There are lots of obstacles to overcome if you really study SRE and want to do it well, want to implement it well, want to implement it such that it creates along the journey as little friction as you can possibly make it.
Sure.
So yeah, ask yourself that why question, and ask it yourself many, many times. Like, do some studying, do some researching, follow some of the practitioners that are very vocal about SRE as a discipline. Look at it from various perspectives, from the individual practitioner's perspective, from the leadership perspective, from the organizational perspective. There's lots to consider. And so I would want for everybody that thinks about getting into it to do their homework, like ask the important why question.
Right, absolutely right. And you touched about the why, and I wanted to kind of relate to my experience. Sometimes when you know the why very clearly, then the how becomes a lot more easier. A lot of the people jump into how to do SRE without even understanding the why. So what has happened in some of the engagements that you have seen is to really get a common denominator of why, if the why is so powerful, right? For example, is it going to be everybody's talking about customer experience issues? And I wanted to understand also, sometimes people think that SRE is a magic wand. We'll come a little bit about on the don'ts part of it. But to be honest, I think that's a good part to start understanding the why. But the why could be different for different people, right? Sometimes the organization that are adopting the broader why might look at it from an organizational dimension perspective, but from an individual standpoint, that why might be different. Do you see things that also might vary from teams that are operating on the why to understand a common definition of why they need to be passionate about doing something like a site reliability engineering?
Yeah, I mean, you got it perfectly right? The different dimensions and different perspectives that also go into the why. Every practitioner should ask themselves the why question, right? As a leader trying to establish SRE in an organization, I need to ask myself that question. And the organization at large needs to ask itself that question. Why do I want this? Why do I think this is a good idea to implement this practice or this discipline into my organization? Why would I want to go onto this journey? And if you're not clear about the answers, if the answers are vague and ambiguous, think more or put it aside and revisit that conversation later, because not being clear about your why just leads you to one of the don'ts. You go into 50 different directions. You don't do any of the things that you could be doing well. Yeah, just be very clear about the why. And there's a second do in there. The thing that can help you with becoming more clear about your why is if you consider your specific context. Again, at all the levels, right? Individual practitioner, SRE leader, organizational level, consider your context, my customer context, my business context, the culture within my organization, the team structure, the things that are already there and exist and work well versus the things that we have gaps in, right? Consider all your organizational pitfalls and idiosyncrasies. All of those dimensions around context can help you to create a fairly well-rounded and educated why, a fairly well and educated expression of your purpose. Why do you want to get into it? And those dimensions, if you go through them one by one, and I talk about this a lot these days, that this is super important to understand your individual context, because one thing that will prevent you from going down this path is when you are not considering all these context aspects, right? Is that you just steal somebody's blueprint, right? Whichever company, Google is the most referred to, but there are other companies that do SRE really well. But people then tend to try to want to take a shortcut. I'll just do it the way Netflix does it, or I just do it the way LinkedIn does it, or Google, even worse, right? And then they realize very, very quickly, because they haven't contemplated their why particularly well, they haven't considered their own circumstance and context really well, that implementing Netflix's strategy at my organization, in my context, does not work. It's going to be ending up in a big failure, and you're going to be miserable right out of the gate. And that sort of taints the discipline and what it can do, the value that it can bring right at the beginning, when it's so important that you position SRE as a practice really, really well, so you make the adoption of that change that you're going to introduce easier. Again, less friction is important, especially at the beginning, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched upon a very important part of the context, and I wanted to reflect upon in some of the engagements that you're working around. We had a contemplation whether we want to hire a new SRE from outside the organization, or shall we look at people who are within the organization, homegrown SRE, to build some of the capability. And what we finally nailed down was the people who are within the organization, who have enough amount of experience as part of wisdom of production. They also understand the nuances of how it operates in their existing environment. As you rightly said, you have a lot of war stories and success stories that has happened over a part of transformations, and people are quickly able to relate to the scenarios that are very relevant to the organization, and they bring those insights. And I think for me, that wisdom of production, that experience in terms of processes, tools, and understanding what will work and not work, and being very pragmatic and realistic, helps a long way to become more realistic, rather than just jumping on the bandwagon and say that, we would become a transformed company in the next 3 to 5 years, right? I mean, it's a wish list to a lot of people, because it's a cool thing to tell as part of to the board that we are becoming like the way of what we call as reliability as a first-class citizen. But we might want to need a lot more things in place. And that also means sometimes there are some prerequisites, right? Because you cannot jump into it without understanding some of those building blocks in how this can be part of it. So do you also think that there might be some things as a building blocks or a prerequisites that we need to have before we kind of jump in to the world of SRE?
No, yeah, 100%, right? And I think we're going to give a little bit of a preview in terms of the don'ts right?
Right.
But one of the building blocks, as you call them, right, is that as an organization, you contemplated the why, you used all the context perspectives that you could utilize in order to create a really well-rounded why. But then one of the building blocks that definitely has to be there is organizational readiness.
Right.
Because if even after that exploration of your purpose, you're still unclear, that means your leadership is unclear. That means your leadership team is not bought into the idea.
Right.
There's a very high chance that best case scenario, as you're trying to implement SRE, you're going to struggle hard, right? Worst case scenario and almost predictable is you're going to fail, right? Because organizationally, you're well-intentioned, you want to commit to it,
right?
But you're not. Like deep down in your heart and across the various leaders that you might have to continuously advocate for, educate and convince and influence, people haven't wrapped their mind around the idea and the importance and the value proposition of SRE.
Right.
And this was going to be an ongoing battle that I've seen play out in two different ways in my personal past. You either spend a lot of daylight continuously convincing people and sort of getting them on board as you go along, but it's a lot of work and a lot of effort to go down that path in that fashion, or you're just gonna fail in your attempt to continuously convince people that SRE brings value, right? SRE can make an impact as a discipline within your organization. You might fail, right?
Yeah,
so having that readiness at the organizational level is super critical as a building block for success, almost right out of the gates.
Awesome. Excellent. Is there any other do's that you would suggest for people as they start thinking about this journey on site reliability engineering?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the people that are contemplating implementing SRE for the very first time, but there are also some do's that maybe resonate a bit better with people that are already doing it, right? So just because you're in it doesn't mean you're on a path to success, or that you're not struggling, or that you might not end up in a tough spot with your back against the wall. And then you need to have a path out of there, right? You need to figure out, how do I get myself unstuck? Right. So one easy thing to do is to constantly reevaluate what you're doing and who do you do it for and why are you doing it? Going back to that why, right? That's not a one-time effort at the beginning of your journey. It seems like common sense, right? And you should probably do this with a lot of things in life, right? Constantly reflect, self-reflect as a practitioner, reflect at the leadership level, and reflect at the organizational level. Routinely pause and reflect, because despite your best efforts at the beginning of your journey or throughout your milestones as you are on that path towards complete absorption of SRE into your business, you will encounter changes, right? So your circumstances change, your context changes, and you need to make sure that you stay aligned. Because if you don't do this regular reflection, you could end up going in a different direction than your company does, your teams do, the teams that you support. Your customer might change their expectation, right? The market may shift, right? Your competitors may challenge you in new and different ways that you didn't anticipate when you first started with your journey. So having that moment where you pause and reflect and figure out, am I still on the right path? Am I still working on the right problems, supporting the right challenges, creating the right opportunities, is one of those do's for seasoned practitioners that is easy to forget, but super critical for your ongoing success of your discipline within your organization.
Yeah, that's very well said, because I think a lot of variables change over a period of time. So the way that you started off a journey towards what it is today and about a couple of years down the lane, you would find there are so many new parameters that are coming in from a context perspective, and that we need to reevaluate, are we spending the right level of time and efforts to move in that direction? But also looking at continual improvement, right? Because today, I think the whole journey is incremental in nature, right? So doing a part of a plan, do, check, act, or reflecting upon and saying that, well, this went right, this was not really good, right? So I love this whole part of stop doing, start doing, keep doing, right? Store, stop, keep. So that actually brings into like a sprint approach of retrospectives, because it will just channelize and say, are we doing the right things in the right manner? But also getting feedback, right? Because I think the part of feedback is not just about reflecting ourselves, but let's talk about whether the users or the end users or the leadership saw the value of doing SRE, right? Because it's not your quantifiable metrics in terms of first call resolution, auto remediation in part, but what we are trying to do has that user experience change dimension, because that feedback is going to be super important to validate whether you're going in the right path or not. So absolutely very well said about the do's. So let's get to change some gears, because we have started to give them the do's, and then I'm sure that everybody is empowered with the do's. Now, as they start getting more energetic in implementing, they start to make some mistakes. So from your perspective, what are some of the don'ts for newbies and practitioners, and we can kind of bounce that out, that people have to watch out cautiously as they go through this journey, because it seems to be a double-edged sword. So I'm just trying to find out some of the don'ts that we want to call out for this episode.
Yeah, let's switch. And just saying, the list of do's and don'ts is actually really, really long, and we can only cover so much in this episode. So we'll give you a little bit of a preview here. And I'm sure if your listeners want to talk to you, if they want to talk to me, they can absolutely follow up with either one of us or both of us.
And we can do another episode separately for other things as well, as we start to 100%. Gain traction. Right?
Yes, if people are interested, absolutely. Because there's a lot to consider, right? So we talked about one already as a don't, be organizationally ready, like mentally, organizationally ready for a journey. For the newbies, I will say something very pragmatic, right? Don't get into SRE because you are aiming for a higher paycheck. Very pragmatic advice, right? The reason why I'm saying this is from my own personal experience. SRE as a practitioner is a very demanding role. Right. So again, contemplate your own personal why. Yes, financial freedom, financial well-being is one of various dimensions that you should be considering, but be ready for the stresses and the responsibilities and the accountability, the ownership that comes along with being in that role. Because in most organizations, especially at the beginning, as you shape that role and what that role means within the context of the organization, it's going to be vague. It's going to be somewhat ambiguous, and you need to be able to figure out what are you supposed to do, who do you supposed to do it with and for, what sort of falls within your mandate, and where are your boundaries, where should other people be taking on certain pieces of work. It's a stressful job. It's a stressful environment, especially if you start with that journey anew and you've never been an SRE practitioner. There's so much that you also need to learn and you experience, right? So get into this role with your eyes wide open. Get into this role if you're a generalist that loves problem solving, loves to overcome challenges, doesn't mind changing course, pivoting very frequently. Don't get into it just for the potential pay increase, because you might be suffering on the private end of your life, because you're investing so much time and effort into this new role, this new job, where you're losing out on family time, time with your kids, time with your friends, all the private things that you love and enjoy. Do it for the right reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a spot on, right? I wanted to think that sometimes it's a thankless job when it comes to site reliability engineering. It's not a glorified role that you would kind of get in place. So we need to understand it's a complete package, right? It comes with a lot of responsibilities and sense of ownership. And as you rightly said, it takes time and effort to prove the value of SRE. So it's not going to be easy kind of driving in and saying that, yes, I'm going to do SRE. That's the cool thing on the earth that we are doing it. Great paycheck. And willing to spend that laborious nights to troubleshoot some of those things and build it, because your ecosystem is not yet matured, right? Reliability as a part is a continuous journey, right? It's not a destination. So being aware of the overall challenge is important. And I also say, Sebastian, that a site reliability engineering is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So you need to really be prepared for a longer version of the run, not the shorter version, because it's not for the faint-hearted. So to be putting it precise, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's people who are knowing exactly what to expect as they start to drive it, because it's going to be a roller coaster ride. And if you're not better prepared mentally, then you would probably not going to like this for a long time. Precisely, right? Excellent point. What else what are the other aspects that you would consider for don'ts?
Maybe another don't for the folks that are already doing it.
Yeah.
Is to not isolate yourself. Sometimes I see that happening, that within your organization, as you are thinking you are on the right track,
right,
you start to engage in initiatives and projects that are self-driven,
right,
by the SRE team, by the SRE function,
right,
that do not connect particularly well with the teams that you are supposed to support, right? The customers that you're supposed to support, the business objectives that you're supposed to support or align with, right? Don't isolate yourself. That's why that other point of me saying pause and reflect under the do section, right, is so critical. You will find when you do that, that you realize, oh, all of a sudden we are a silo. Right. Not quite sure how it happened, right? But that pause and reflect that you do as part of your, team habits on a regular cadence, say, whatever, every 6 months or so, you will find that, oh, we need to readjust, right? We need to make sure we're not like moving away too far from everything and everyone that we are supposed to enable and engage with and collaborate with. We don't want to be that island within the organization, because then it becomes really hard for you to connect your initiatives with the initiatives of others, connect with the business objectives, connect with the expectations of your customers. So make sure you don't isolate yourself within your organization. That's another don't for practitioners, because like I said, sometimes it happens without your say so, right? It just emerges almost, right? And one day you have an epiphany. Oh, it feels weird, right? All of a sudden we are isolated in the organization. We got to change that, right? But unless you do that self-reflection or that team reflection, you may not notice until it's already a little bit late. And then you have to do a lot of effort circling back, building new bridges, like reinvigorating some existing ones. And yeah, there's another don't there, or maybe kind of a do and a don't, that what do you do? What actions are you taking now? But I want to give you the chance to respond maybe to the one.
Yeah, so that's a great point. One of the things that you were talking about is many times when people are very passionate, right? They do the extra effort, they put the things around, they're on a running on a hamster wheel, right? Hamster on a wheel. So they're kind of going there. They have clear deliverables. They're looking at toil reduction. They're looking at managing the SLOs. They're looking at anti-fragile testing like chaos engineering. So you have everything cut out in terms of task, right? And they are very focused on things that, we can move faster. And I think this is very important to take a step back and reflect. If you want to move faster, right, you can do alone. But if you want to move farther, you need to do with a team. So this is very important for people to kind of reflect upon, saying that, you know what, I would want to move faster, but that's not going to be the secret sauce, because I can only go so much because it's just a sprint. So reflecting upon that and saying, can I look at this across my end-to-end value stream? Because for me, just being focusing on SRE role, discipline, or a capability is very short-sighted. So trying to be able to fit into the overall scheme of the program and getting regular feedback is absolutely important, because you can drift completely 180 to 360 degree away because you got so much ingrained into the work that you do that you can lose sight of the real purpose of why we started off. So absolutely spot on in terms of don't pay attention to that element of what you said about pausing and reflecting, because you never know, sometimes you're drifting out and it's like a 6-degree difference by the time you are into a different trajectory altogether, which might be too late for you to recover back, which is absolutely spot on.
Yeah, you're very right. And the one thing that I keep saying to my own teams and to everyone else that wants to listen, SRE is not self-serving, right? We're not doing SRE for the sake of SRE, right? If you do that, if you find yourself in that position, you need to follow the next don't, right? The next don't is don't be afraid to pivot.
Right.
Frequently, if you have to, right? That's where we go back to context. And context includes change in process, change in organizational structure, change in your competitive landscape, change within your customers' expectations, change in terms of the people that you're working with within your own team or the teams that you're supporting, right? Change will inevitably lead you to having to pivot. Don't be afraid of doing that, right? And sometimes you need to do this frequently until you're not feeling like you can measure that you're back on track.
Right.
Back on track to support the teams that you're working with, because like I said, SRE is not self-serving, right? You're supporting continuously the customer journeys, right? Making sure they're pleased, and you're there to support the business objectives, right? So don't be afraid to pivot when you need to. Let go of the thing that you're working on, even if you're right in the middle of it and you're realizing it's not the most valuable, high impact problem or challenge or opportunity that I'm working on right now. It's something else that showed up on the horizon, or something that came in from left field that I didn't plan for or anticipated. It's now the most important thing that we can do in order to help customers, supported teams, and the organization be okay with just dropping what you're doing and change minds, change your focus in order to always ensure that you're working on those things that create impact and have the highest value within your organization, because that is how you show within your company, across the teams, that you know how to focus, that you know how to pivot, that you have a change mindset, and you're very adaptable to the change in circumstances that sometimes happen within our world.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I think this is a fantastic way to kind of put that into perspective, because for me, there's two outcomes on this whole part. Because when you are trying to say, don't be afraid to pivot, it means that you have a growth mindset. The most important part is, just because you have worked on certain things that has given you results doesn't mean that you have to continue moving forward, because there's so much things have changed. And also, it brings to the point of diversity, right? Because you will have people from other dimensions who would probably look at things that you have never looked at it from that pair of lens. So having that openness, curiosity to say that I might not be right? Like what Steve Jobs says, if you go to the conference room and say that you are the smartest person, probably you are in the wrong room. So allowing the other person an opportunity to voice out, hey, you know what? This is an area that we don't think we are doing anything about it. And trying to be open and receptive to new ideas. And also these meetups and podcasts can give a quick eureka thought that we might want to pivot around. And for all of us, we know that how organizations pivoted when COVID-19 struck, right? The priorities changed very dynamically, and you had to take action because time was ticking in, right? So some of the projects which are planned were just off shelf, and then we came up with new priorities in the way to do it. And it's good, right? Because that makes life a lot more interesting, in my opinion, Sebastian, because if you just work on saying that, okay, this is all my planned initiatives and projects and I want to carry on, there's no fun in the whole part, because you need to kind of make sure that you are fully present physically, mentally, and seeing what makes the most sense. So it also requires a bit of cultural change, because some people are very obsessed because something was already picked up, and we need to get that feeling it's okay to let it go, because sometimes we hold it very strongly to our heart because we are so passionate. But that's an absolute nugget that I think everybody should to embark on. We can talk for hours, but I think we are getting into the final segment of doing it. So what is one key area that you think SRE should focus on? Even they are newbies or practitioners, what kind of the skill set or competencies they need to focus on to become more relevant, right? And they go pass through this journey that's all becoming, they knew the do's and don'ts, but it's an uphill battle, right? It's going to be not a bed of roses. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. It's going to be completely demanding aspect. So what do you think that the site reliability engineers, both newbies and practitioners, should keep in mind to carry on the baton? Because it seems to be having some level of mental muscle or to run through that. So what would be your final call out on those competencies and skills that are so important for a site reliability engineer?
So without going too much into a very different topic that is also very relevant for SREs, but I have for myself developed a bit of a mental model, right? It's based on certain pillars. And these pillars help me to change course, set the stage, help me do a lot of things with my teams. But one of those pillars is called advocacy. And advocacy is almost a default in terms of what my teams are doing at all times. There can be many other focus areas that we get into, and we need to pivot on those and switch those if we have to, right? As circumstances change. That is almost one that never changes.
Right.
Advocacy is there at the beginning. Advocacy is there in the middle, and because there is no end, if you commit to the journey of SRE, sometimes I'm explaining it to people saying, look at it as if you were to say, I'm starting sales now in my organization, or I'm starting marketing in my organization now. Like, nobody would ever suggest we stop doing these things. Right? Going back to where you're saying SRE is a marathon. It's going to be there as long as your company functions. As long as you're running your company and you're not closing shop and retiring or do whatever, SRE is going to be there. It's one of those new things within your company that enables your company to do its job, fulfill its purpose the best way you know how as an organization. And in order to make that an ongoing success, it also needs to be continuously advocated for. The value proposition, why we're here, what are we doing, be transparent about the work that you're committed to and that you have delivered. Like, continuous advocacy is a must for newbies, experienced practitioners, to make sure that people don't forget that it's there and that it continues to provide value to the organization.
Excellent way of wrapping up the session with saying advocacy. And it's something that we'll have to stay back with SREs, as Sebastian rightly mentioned. As long as your company is going to be there, site reliability engineering role, discipline, capability will continue to exist. I hope you enjoyed this session with Sebastian on the do's and don'ts of both newbies as well as practitioners. And I know that we have a lot more coming in as we start to go through this episodes. But thank you so much, Sebastian, for sharing your nuggets of wisdom today with our viewers. And I'm sure that they will have a lot more to stand to gain from this episode and future episodes of SRE Path, where they kind of get to know how they can drive these transformations. Thank you so much again.
I appreciate you, Suresh, you having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I hope that to meet you in our next episode of episode 19 of Site Reliability Engineering Practitioner. So post on your comments if you like this one, subscribe to this channel, and we look forward to seeing you in another episode of SRE Practitioner series. Until then, celebrate Site Reliability Engineering and do your best to shine big as Site Reliability Engineers. Thank you so much.